I'm now opening it on the YouTube stream.
Yes.
Yes, it works. Yeah.
Can you tell me if you think
Where's it at? Which link is it? Climate Change Coalition?
Uh, Climate Change Coalition YouTube channel. Yeah.
Okay, I'll share it.
I did a QR code and then probably.
I can do this as soon as you click. That was business event, so it's nice to have that change. But also we're live streaming this event as well on the Climate Change Coalition's YouTube channel. I'd like to say thanks to Dell Technologies for hosting us today and for this open collaboration. They've also been involved with us leading up to today's collaboration as well, working on some of the digitizing MRV, both with hardware and methodological frameworks. And so we're going to start off today with a welcome message from Dell, what they're doing on sustainability, and then we'll go into the overview of the open collaboration, our working groups, and where we're going to go next with it. And then we'll go join everybody in the reception following. So please come up, see. Welcome, everyone. an audit. I've worn a lot of hats over the last 30 years. But when we used to go out to field, do an audit on site, before that you do a risk assessment. Where are the potential areas that there could be an error or an omission leading backwards up the data trail towards the sources of information, whether there might be a measurement uncertainty or error, or maybe there's one with the methodology itself built in, a level of accuracy with it as well. And so in the process of developing this digital MRV pilot prototype, learned about the data confidence fabric and how they use that methodological framework layered on top of the digital systems and the data that's flowing through. So it's an additional level of how to come up with a level of assurance, something that has a quantitative measure to it. And I think that's going to become more and more important, not just at facility sites or at project level, but flowing right across carbon markets and the finance as well. So with that little bit of history to add to Steve's, if I can invite Margaret Kim to come up, CEO of Gold Standard, and give an overview of the open collaboration, please.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Steve, for providing this wonderful space for all of us together today. And I really want to thank Tom and Matt from IOTA Foundation and ClimateCHECK to make sure for their leadership in this entire partnership, because I think our team from Gold Standard had the great pleasure in working with you and looking forward to the partnership going forward. Before I start, I want to sort of step back from the technology angle and bring our attention to why. So the Paris Agreement and its 1.5-degree target basically requires carbon markets to be at 10-folds or 100-folds from what we are today. And I just come back from a launch of the workshop for CCPs, the ICVCM working group, and we're talking about interesting balance that we need to strike between scale and integrity. And while ICVCM works on the principles of what makes integrity, I think there's a really important element that technology plays. And we, in order for us to scale this market, we really need to think about how to make it easier, how to make it faster, and how to make it better. And technology basically sits on all three principles, all three objectives of scaling the market. So I really appreciate our partners and also all of you who signed up for the working groups to join us, and really want to thank google.org. I don't know if is Christine here today, who's provided support for this open collaboration program for us to really launch these three working groups. I really want to highlight one thing before I give the floor to the leads, is when we talk about current carbon markets and the use of technology, we really need to be mindful of the entire carbon value chain or the impact value chain, how projects are designed, first how standards are set up, how projects are designed, how they are monitored, and what's the carbon or impact outcome through that process and how they're being traded and used. If we don't look at the entire value chain of that carbon project or impact project, then one technology leading on one side of sort of a broken leg is not useful, and we will never reach that scale we need. So I think I really encourage all of you, part of our working groups, to think about that, because I know what's beautiful about this working groups is that we bring stakeholders from all parts of the world, all parts of the industries with different interests. But one thing that's really underlying in all of our participation is wanting to make sure we scale the market with integrity. And I think all of you who signed up for these working groups have signed up for those underlying principles. So I'm really looking forward to building the trusted conversations and discussions going forward, and looking forward to what comes out of that. Thank you very much.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Lugers, also from Gold Standard. I'll echo a lot of what Maggie said and just start to frame things and maybe even take a further step back. While we're really pleased and frankly grateful that there's such energy from the technology community to help us accelerate climate action, I want to take a moment to kind of revisit our roots and remind people what Gold Standard stands for and what kind of principles are going to inform, first of all, our consultation that we have published recently, and also anything that we invest in moving forward in terms of digitization. So 2003, we were created as a quality label for the Clean Development Mechanism, and we were charged with two things. One was to safeguard the environmental integrity, to make sure climate impact was real, and then also to deliver on the promise of sustainable development, the D in CDM, which had largely been ignored or wasn't fulfilling like its promise, let's say. So, over time, we've gone beyond compliance markets into the voluntary market, where we're now like known for a benchmark for quality, hundreds of project developers, thousands of projects in almost 100 countries, more than 200 million tons of CO2 reduced, and billions of dollars in shared value to sustainable development. And I say this is because this is where we owe our responsibility to safeguard. And it's also the opportunity from which we can build by going 10 times faster, 10 times more efficient, et cetera, with digitization. So fast forward to 2021, where the worlds of carbon markets and crypto really collided. And I'll be honest, it really caught Gold Standard by surprise. In some ways, we'd been interested in digitization, but this force, came on strong. And we had to really take a step back to say assess what is the opportunity, what are the guardrails that are needed. So we had to push pause at that moment to make sure that we could make good on that, and look and seize the opportunity instead of this being done to the standards, that we can move forward technology providers and standards together. We understand to a certain point it's frustrating for the tech world because you like to move fast and break things. So the very kind of slow and deliberate nature of standards has a tension there, but we hope that this is a healthy tension that we can make the most of. So that's why we're here today, the open collaboration. We want to bring your expertise together with ours and again, make the best of both worlds. So when we get down to the working group on digital assets, which I'll talk a bit more about today, we do want to create a market-wide blueprint. We really want to set the floor, let's say, but we also want to look at what the gold standard version of tokenization might be. So in a spirit of not being a blocker, we've moved forward with a phase one to start to define the principles under which Gold Standard will authorize the tokenization of our carbon credits, so that we can safeguard integrity and the reputation of the market, which is really important. So you'll see some of the principles here that we'll consider under which we would authorize credits. Some of these, like the model, whether it's a custodial account, with an aim to move forward to native tokenization in the future, but we want to have some kind of short-term solutions that work for the market, and how holdings and retirements happen. And many of these won't be too surprising. We tried to align to the fullest extent possible with, for example, AIOTA's Code of Best Practice. But we also wanted to introduce some additional questions about, for example, pooling. How do we ensure that when we aim for more liquidity, we're not doing so at the expense of projects that are more complicated to certify, that are delivering more impact on the ground, so that we don't crowd those out in the bid for more liquidity in tokenization, as with any kind of standard contract moving forward. So you'll see the consultation is open now. It will be open through the 28th of October, with an aim to synthesize not only this, but what I'll talk about in a moment, some further discussions with the working groups that'll go beyond this kind of base, the guardrails to safeguard integrity, and to think about new ways that tokenization can not just have a new infrastructure for business as usual, but also catalyze more impact. So if you go forward one slide, beyond this first phase, we will look at how, not, again, moving beyond business as usual and new infrastructure, how can verified units find new traders, new market participants? How can smart contracts, for example, help bring finance directly to people on the ground, stimulate new project development? How can digital platforms, including tokens, help people really understand what quality means? Because right now that's pretty confusing to the average buyer. How can this work with the longer term carbon markets with Article 6, for example? And then even more, when we think beyond carbon credits, some of these fundamentals that we're putting in place now, how can we translate those principles into assets, digital tokens for impacts far beyond carbon? Not just the co-benefits, but potentially assets that represent SDG impact in and of their own, for their own sake. So that's the journey that we're headed on. If you go to the last slide, we really want to see how this full ecosystem that Maggie talked about, the full value chain, and how a digital infrastructure can help. Oh, I think we missed one, but that's all right. The idea is to go to get to the stakeholders on the ground, to the people implementing cook stove projects, providing safe water access, community solar, things like this. How can they be empowered to implement the projects themselves and benefit, not just as a side gig, just it's a nice happy accident, but that it's financially benefiting those players on the ground. So that's the journey we're starting today, and really look forward to the inputs both in the near-term consultation and also on these bigger ideas, how we can shape ways to use digital infrastructure to drive more impact in the future. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the Digital MRV Working Group, which was the slide that's up next. Thanks very much, Miroslav. I'm Tom Bauman, and I don't think I introduced myself before. I'm a co-leader of the Digital MRV Working Group, along with Vikash Telyan, the head of scheme at Gold Standard, and Matt Yarger, also of IOTA. And I think Margaret made a really good point about looking at digital innovations and the technologies in the context of a lot of other innovations, like governance innovations and financial innovations. They really need to come together. Digital on itself can only go so far, particularly when we need to have the methodologies that are part of the lifeblood of the integrity of the carbon markets, not just carbon credits, but right across all of them, of course. And it reminded me that we launched the open collaboration at COP26 last year, and that's, I believe, where Google really resonated with the message. And as we put that white paper out, we included, even going back further in time to COP21, and some photos of Gold Standard. Myself, at the time, I was chairing ISO's Climate Change Standards Committee, the international one, and looking at next generation solutions. That seems like an era ago in terms of blockchain and digital, but things are really starting to move now. And so the Digital MRV Working Group, just to sort of highlight some of our approach to how can we modernize MRV, not just taking methodologies that exist now, putting them into practice using digital sensors and blockchain and so on, recognize that even the methodologies themselves need to incorporate digital requirements, and the process by which those methodologies are modernized and upgraded could also use a refresh, recognizing how rapidly the markets are moving and the need for cohesive tracking of all of the climate actions, because they're all connected one way or the other, and also recognizing that we're going to expand beyond climate at some point so that there's cohesion across SDG accounting, more broadly speaking. We certainly recognize there's a huge array of digital for climate and digital for sustainability initiatives, and they're all working together with people who are common across those different initiatives. We certainly hope we'll see more and more convergence because they're all working on different pieces, whether they're data schemas or metadata frameworks, such as what ICL Alliance is working on, and many, many more, too many to really announce. And so in the Digital MRV Working Group, I think we have about 30 or 40 organizations representing the digital space. I think about 25% of the working group is from the digital space, another 25% from NGO, government, research, and from many, many countries, because we wanted to have a really rich multi-stakeholder process. And the two main areas that we're focused on, firstly, is to develop new guidance that would be used primarily by methodology developers, whether that's the programs or sometimes proposed from outside the programs for review with the program, so that there is a consistent framework across all of the sectors that are going to be incorporating so many different types of digital technologies. Sometimes it's remote sensing, some AI, and other times it's digital sensors and IoT devices in facilities and mobile and so on. How to build in sort of at a core cross-cutting level a framework that allows for some comparability and a bit of building block or modularity approach that can then subsequently show up in an array of different sector-specific or sub-sector methodology guides for building in the right mix of digital tools. Now, we know today we're still in the early stages of digitization in this journey. It's going to take several years as the technologies evolve and the users feel comfortable with them and they have the prerequisites, whether it's connectivity necessary for some of these digital tools or other competencies and resources. And so, thanks for putting up this timeline here. So very briefly then, we're aiming to, actually just last week, launched our first scoping draft and survey amongst the working group members, and we're going to reach out further to be informed by case studies in different sectors and using different technologies, as well as ensuring that we have a really good connection into some of the digital initiatives that, for example, have existing standards for the design of, say, digital twins or IoT-enabled systems. Because we're not going to reinvent that. We're going to leverage all of those technologies in bringing them together in the methodologies that we're developing. Beyond digitizing methodologies for the monitoring, data collection, and quantification, also looking at verification and how that can be digitized, not only sort of digital audit that's happening in the financial sector first and foremost, but looking at how the implications are to modernize how the verification and accreditation of verifiers and how they're going to become sort of working hand in hand with digital and how it's applied for assurance purposes and audit purposes going forward. That's our second subgroup, and we're going to be doing that just around COP as well. We're not as far along as the digital assets working group, but we're looking at then creating a case study that's going to pilot what we're developing as these guides, likely with a gold standard methodology to see how does it look as a digitized methodology, and then hopefully get that into some actual digital MRV pilots in the new year and leading up to sort of this Q2 as publishing all of it as the first phase. And in the interim, we're certainly reaching out to other stakeholders who might want to be involved, bring in some resources and expand the work that we're kicking off with these few months. So that's the quick overview of the Digital MRV Working Group, and I'm looking forward to the conversations afterwards. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks again, Steve and Dell, for your gracious support and hosting the facility here with us and allowing us all to come together here. I'm Matt Yarger. I am head of the Digital Infrastructure and Open APIs Working Group. I'm also the head of sustainability at the IOTA Foundation. And Maggie, thank you, Margaret, excuse me. Thank you for your intro. You highlighted a lot of points that I really picked up on. And I think talking about how what we're trying to do isn't just one facet, but all the different facets, whether it's the supply side, the demand side, or what comes in the middle, is really important to this open collaboration. And that's one thing I like to highlight as well when it comes to the structure of the working groups. And I put tweet threads out and all kinds of other things on this. But with each working group, there is a specific focus on one sector of that problem, with the digital MRV working group, it's really, how do we take the supply side and take what is, as Tom likes to say, 80% to 90% analog and 10% digital, and flip that ratio to where it's 80 to 90% digital and 10% analog, because we have a really big global problem that needs to be digital to be able to be solved in the way that it needs to be solved. With my working group, with digital infrastructure and open APIs, it's how do we then take those different types of project level implementations and integrate it into the voluntary carbon markets? How do we work with Gold Standard and one of the other open collaboration members, the American Carbon Registry, and define what this infrastructure needs to look like to be able to consume that level of digital input and decrease the certification timelines down from sometimes years down to months, and also decrease that cycle of projects or partners or organizations getting their carbon credit returns sometimes 24, 36 or more in a cyclical pattern down to a monthly return. Because I think idealistically, or maybe a utopian vision, we can get to that point with a high level of digital, but it takes a lot of work and probably at least another 3 to 5 years at least before we get there idealistically. And then Sarah, you did a great job introing on the digital assets working group. I know Hugh leads that up, and he wasn't able to be here, but I wanted to highlight that you did highlight a lot of really great points on that. And that digital assets has a big piece to play. And with us at IOTA, we're a token, we're a cryptocurrency, we're a blockchain as well, but from a nonprofit perspective. But with what we're doing here, we've really been concerned with what's the right way to come into this space and tokenize things. Is it NFTs? Is it digital assets? Is there a balance in between? And we think that with Gold Standard and ACR and others in the space, we can understand that before we use these technologies to come in and start to really disrupt things too progressively, because we don't want to come in to the carbon space or the sustainability space and do something that creates a negative impact and really slows everything down. We want to figure out what's the right way to do this together collaboratively, standardize what that looks like, and then go from there proactively. For my working group, we have this big goal of how do we create the best middleware we can to standardize the markets. We want to enable interoperability, we want to enable scale, and we want to enable all the different data that comes once you flip that ratio to happen in a really progressive and secure way and with a high degree of confidence. Because if you have a lot of bad data coming in to create new tokenization or new carbon credit systems, then it's going to become a detriment to the industry as well. So you need to have a very high level of confidence, a high level of quality, and Gold Standard being who they are, we really love the adherence to that quality mindset as well. For our planned outputs, we have an open source submission hub. You can think of this from a blockchain perspective as Ethereum improvement proposals. How do we build that, but for the carbon markets? How do we build a submission system where we can start to understand how to improve the infrastructure, where the open research communities around the world can contribute in an open way to say, this is an improvement that we think you can make to your system. And then you have a process or a technical advisory committee or various things that can be established to start to make approvals and increase and iterate on this infrastructure. Because we're not going to solve it in 1 year, we're not going to build it in 1 year, and we're not going to implement it in 1 year. It's going to take iteration after iteration after iteration. And that's one thing the technical side of this community has really understood, and they can bring in to help accelerate. The other part is once we have the submission hub and the structured repositories, how do we then take a report and say, all right, if you have a methodology that's digital or digitally native, that's something that could become a public asset. If you want to keep it proprietary because that's your business model, that's fine. But a lot of us think that those type of things should be opened up so that all the small businesses around the world can start to adopt your methodologies if they are seen as the best in the space, and they can start to implement those locally. Because you can support small businesses, you can support new partner ecosystems, you can support product advancements with open models like this. And we think if we can build this infrastructure or a guideline for it and start to iterate on that, then we got a lot of a good foundation to make the progress that needs to be made. And then along with that, an API is another big piece of infrastructure. One for how do you take the projects on the ground with what we're doing with Dell and Molina, Chile and other areas and connect that directly into the registries. But then how do you allow one registry to share data with another registry? How do you allow Vera and Gold Standard to start to have interoperability between the registries? Because then that's going to really start to solve that supply side problem. Next slide. So this is our timeline. Well, as you can see, we've had our first meeting. We're in Climate Week now. I sent out some updates. One of the big goals was part of that was some action items for the working group members. We're going to go into a public survey, which is a good output of our first meeting, because we want to understand how do we take these different methodologies and infrastructures and then tie them into compliance markets as well. We like to see the voluntary carbon market essentially as a free market. That's where you get to see a lot of the innovation and iteration happening more quickly. And then compliance markets can look at what's happening in the voluntary space and say, okay, this is what's working, this is what's not working. These are the type of certifications or the types of systems we need from a compliance perspective to be able to scale to NDCs and things of that nature. So we should be publishing that survey hopefully before the second meeting in October, but I think it's probably going to come a little bit after because Climate Week has put a little bit of a hold on everything. So I'm hoping to get that feedback over the next few weeks and move forward. And then we've got COP27 and our third meeting. And then we're also going to have 2 public consultations. The first public consultation is on defining what the digital infrastructure side looks like and how we can start to standardize that. What does digital mean? What does infrastructure mean? Like core definitions, and starting to build out some of the architecture of what that looks like. And the second consultation is, now that we have a base infrastructure, what do the APIs look like? How does it apply to projects? How can they advance their integrations with the voluntary carbon market registries? Or how can the registries start to interoperate a little bit more together? And then we're looking to publish and submit some of our methodologies from ClimateCHECK and IOTA into that system once it's ready to set up. So we can say, you know, we've done 2 digital MRV methodologies already. A digital MRV methodology for anaerobic biodigestion in Chile isn't going to be the same though as a digital MRV methodology for anaerobic biodigestion in Ghana. There's going to be differences depending on the nation state that you're integrating in, but depending on what digital capabilities are available locally and depending on what kind of partners and infrastructure there is to support it. And that's all I got. Tom?
That's all we have for pictures, but we're more than happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Corinne Boone. I'm with Air Carbon Exchange. I sort of had a question about, maybe I'm thinking a bit too far ahead, but if we do this properly, like as the market, and develop our methodologies and transaction systems and all of that properly, and especially in the blockchain, and I kind of feel like the compliance markets are going to catch up to the voluntary markets a lot quicker than potentially what these timelines dictate. And I guess the reason why I asked the question is that I'm sort of hoping that perhaps in your working groups and that maybe there could be some thought looking at it from the future backwards as opposed to going forwards, because I really think that things are going to start to happen quite rapidly as we go forward, especially with digitalization. And there's an opportunity to really think about it. Compliance markets are going to take over much of the voluntary markets, in my view, anyway, as time goes on. So how do we integrate that? I know I'm not a member of any of the groups, but I sort of think it's important to think about that because at one point they're going to converge, right? So
That's a really good point to make. Yeah, Maggie, please.
I think that's an excellent point. I think one of the things that we can add as gold standard is the fact that we've been advocating for voluntary carbon market, or at least our strategies and standards to align with Paris Agreement and Article 6. So, and then we are eligible under COSIA. So more and more, there's convergence between eligibility criteria and requirements, and gold standard where we want to be is to make sure that we cover those different requirements under the umbrella of gold standard for the global goals, so that the users of the standard and therefore the users of these digital platforms can actually go through that in a streamlined way. I mean, I'm making it sound very simple. It's much more complex than that. But I think that's where standard bodies have a role to play in trying to bring that harmonization with higher floor of quality.
And I get that. That's admirable. I think I'm just thinking, like I talk about this I'm with Air Carbon Exchange, and I talk on my expertise is in the compliance side. So I talk to the teams a lot about that. Like how do we start thinking backwards and forwards at the same time, like, to innovate a bit. So I guess it would, as a newcomer looking at this, I think it would just be interesting to bring some of what your goals are into that discussion, because I think there might be some really interesting interesting ideas that come up. So, just a thought.
Totally agree. I think some of that work's been happening in the Climate Ledger Initiative research that they've been doing and trying to outline what those future states are and maybe a phased approach, and the same thing with the Climate Change Coalition, because all of the different stakeholders, right, the users in particular, when are they going to be ready to do, join in at what level of the digital transformation? And there's been a lot of really interesting work, like our common digital future really starts to lay out a really rich future vision, not just for carbon markets, but beyond, like with sustainability. And how do we sort of define tangible milestones to work towards that are aligned with what people can actually
So maybe you've already thought about it, but it's just a thought.
Well, we've thought about it, still a lot of work to do. So
Thank you very much.
I think it's also a hope too. Like that's what we all want to see happen, and that's what we hope the outcome is. But we think that if things like this aren't getting the traction that they are, then it's hard to see the compliance markets making those strides in the time span that they need to.
See, I sort of see the compliance markets behind the scenes doing a lot more than we think. So, but anyway, it's interesting. It's all going to be successful this time.
we'll do our best, right? Thanks a lot, Corinne. Any other questions before we break into reception and smaller groups? Please go ahead.
So I know that you've just gone out for consultation. So do companies that are not part of your working groups just submit? Is that how, or do we, like, how does that process take place other than the submission?
The consultation that the digital MRV, digital assets, I think they're two. Yes, Eric, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's live on our website, and there are instructions for providing feedback.
Yeah.
It's certainly open to everyone, and I can invite you to that.
Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us for the main event presentations, and also looking forward to the opportunity to talk with everybody as much as possible the next couple of hours. Thanks.